All right, everyone. Thanks for joining me with me today. My name is Josh Harrison. I'm a student at GNOMON here in Hollywood. I'm studying effects at the School of Animation, Film, and Video Games. I'm going to give a quick spiel about the benefits of GPU rendering and how it's affected me as a burgeoning 3D artist, and kind of like how GPU rendering compares to CPU traditional rendering, and how as a student or someone who has an individual license and is an aspiring artist, how it can affect your pipeline and make you more efficient and just a more creative artist in general. So who am I? My name is Josh. I'm part of the 2-year program at GNOMON. I'm going to show you my reel. It's a work in progress. I'm currently wrapping up the 2-year program, so I'll be graduating this winter. But I've done a couple projects that have gotten a little bit of notoriety because they have these competitions at school called the Best of Term competitions, where you can kind of compete against other students and win some prizes that GNOMON gives out. This was The Last Defender. It was one of my early pieces during the program, and it was kind of my gateway into Redshift in general, because this project was actually rendered in V-Ray, but it was the first. I did several passes with it that were rendered in Redshift, and it kind of opened my eyes into the possibilities that Redshift offers in terms of just increasing speed and increasing productivity. This is Quadruped, which was V-Ray. And then just some other earlier projects that just were kind of helping me understand Maya, and that GNOMON was offering these introduction courses. This was a group project that I did with several students at GNOMON. This is also completely rendered in Redshift. And then this last one has violent tendencies. It was my most recent animation. It was completely done and rendered in Redshift, but I'm not able to show you because of certain rules against violence and showing it on the presentation. But that's for later. But if you are interested, this was the Vanguard piece was my first project that was completely rendered in Redshift, and I have to say, like, it's a night and day difference. I'm going to go through in depth about like the pros and cons of each and my experiences with them. But yeah, so let's go ahead and start. All right, so I'm going to talk first about The Last Defender. It won the Best of Term for lighting at GNOMON. I'll show you a breakdown here in a moment, but I want to talk about like where that project came to fruition. It started as a midterm project for my Intro to Maya class with Max Dyan, where the assignment and prompt for the project was to basically match a photo. So on the left, you can see the photo of this cathedral in Spain, in Segovia, Spain. And our assignment was basically just recreate it as close as possible within a 5-week period. I'm pretty proud, considering this was like 5 weeks after like I was completely new to Maya in general and Redshift. But then after, I ended up taking that project and bringing it into my lighting class. And we had an assignment for that class where it was basically integrate characters, integrate some type of composition with it, and we had to come out with 3. And during this process, it was mainly just kit bashing, stuff that I could find online. All the characters are Mixamo or either just TurboSquid assets that you can download for free. But as you probably have guessed by now, I settled on this last one because I liked it. It had a very nice composition from top left to right. Like, I always knew from the get-go that I wanted these God rays, which is going to be something that was finally accomplished with Redshift that I wasn't really able to do with V-Ray because of just like the processing time and how long these renders took. But I like this composition because it has just good linear top-down lefts, and then also kind of dramatic lighting and good feel of like foreground, midground, and background. So how Redshift has like benefited me. I'm going to show you actually a quick breakdown of that. Defender project and talk a little bit more about it. So this is the final product. The Dragon is not my own. It's a free rig from CG Churong online. He's a great rigger, and he makes a lot of his rigs completely available to the public. I think that the most expensive one he has is like $10, but in terms of quality and what you get, I always go back to his rigs first because they also seamlessly integrate into Maya. And then the breakdown. So again, this is kind of the geometry breakdown of the Segovia Cathedral. What was really nice is because it's kind of modularly built, I could just create one arch and then duplicate it around the whole process, breaking up the different comp layers and effects. I am part of the effects track at GNOMON, so I was really pushing for this project and specifically to add these elements of like the Maya fluids, which was in the ink cloth, and integrating them into the scene. These godways were the ones that would, this top left pass was completely done in Redshift, and that's, the reason was, at the time for a 1080 like render, each frame, I had like 550 frames for that whole like 8-second sequence. But my frames for V-Ray were taking upwards of 20 to 25 minutes, which as a student, it's not conducive to like a good final product because it just takes so much time. But being able to make that transition to Redshift, whereas this Godray pass moved from what would have been a 30-35 with the atmospheric fog in V-Ray to a closer to like 1 minute to 2 minutes in Redshift. And it's just an excellent example of how GPU rendering can just use the full capacity of your graphics cards in order to make better render times and just an overall better pipe flow. Again, the baseline for the base rig for the character was done by CG Churong, and I often like to just put my geometry on top of the rigs because that way I already know that they are fully rigged. I can just start animating immediately, and as long as you give them a credit as a student, you get a lot of artistic license. All right, so where Redshift benefited me. As you probably know at this point, Redshift is currently ranked like the fastest final frame renderer on the market. I know that V-Ray is coming out with V-Ray Next, which hopefully will offer like some type of competition, but as it stands now, there's really no comparison with regards to where Redshift is and where V-Ray is. So this is one VDD, just a smoke simulation in Houdini, or a pyro simulation in Houdini. V-Ray is bottom left, and Redshift 2.5 is top left. And you can look at the times below. I don't know if you can read it from that far away, but the top left is 36 seconds for a final frame render, whereas V-Ray is around 7.5 minutes. And as an artist, particularly like a student, where you're going to go through multiple iterations of these projects, being able to cut down on this render time is going to have like long-standing effects on the entire process. So how does this speed? Because that's, at the end of the day, that's all you're really getting is speed and a hardware that's able to interact directly with this software. So first off, by having a graphics card, particularly like, for example, an NVIDIA graphics card, it means that you don't need as much of a render farm in order to like get these kind of frames. So whereas you would probably need like 8 computers with a CPU rendering, with Redshift, all that like these 8 separate computers that use CPU rendering would basically be the equal of just one Redshift GPU rendering computer. And in terms of just being a new artist or like being a freelance artist, you're not really going to have access to a render farm. Like you might have like a monthly subscription or just like several computers at your house, but you're not really going to divvy out your projects into like these multiple computers and start rendering a farm. So be able to compete with like these top studios and be able to do so with only needing like one graphics card per rig is like very affordable, and then also it just helps your pipeline. Quote by Panos Zambolos, one of the co-founders of Redshift, where he talks about individual can install 4 high-end CPUs into one computer and rival the performance of several tens of high-end CPU render farms. And this goes along this idea of hardware, is that the less space that you need, basically the more money that you can fund into your projects, into the actual creative aspect of it. And another great thing is that because NVIDIA works so seamlessly with Redshift, as you start investing more and more into these cards, you can just easily interchange them or just stack them, and it allows for more progression. Because one of the things that I find very frustrating as a freelance artist is that you always have to update your software, and that's just a really annoying thing that you have to get over, is that you always have to update to like the newest form. Otherwise, some of the plugins just won't work, or some of your cloud services won't work. And being able to do that while simultaneously just being able to update your GPU, it just works really well. Empowers a single licensed user. In terms of bidding as a freelance artist, you can eventually bid on these larger projects, and it's going to add more revenue. Like being able to cut down on production time is going to affect so many aspects of your pipeline, because it's going to allow you to basically say yes to a lot of projects that you just wouldn't have the time otherwise, because you're cutting your render time from 8 minutes to 1 minute. And that just translates across the board in terms of what you're actually capable to do as an artist, and even as like a freelance artist, or even smaller studios. My teacher, David Shapinis, who was the CG head or CG lead for COSA and for Pixelmondo, and just recently moved to Shade Effects, he's constantly advertising and advocating to make for these larger studios like Pixelmondo to make the transition to a Redshift, because it's just going to affect the entire pipeline, and they can make larger bids to outbid other companies, and that helps not only a single license but small studios as well. But perhaps like the most, and this is personally speaking, perhaps the biggest difference that Redshift offers for a student and for a freelance user is this idea of iterations. Is the idea that you can go back and re-render, and there's not necessarily a penalty. You don't have to wait a night or like render overnight and then wait and see what happens in the morning and then find out you have an error. What's really nice is that you can render in 5 minutes, go get coffee, come back, and then have like that almost real-time feedback. I know if you're working in Unreal or Unity, then you can basically have that with the RTX, like real-time ray tracing and all the cool things that are happening within these past couple of years. But to be able to do that as an effects artist working in Houdini, it helps tremendously. So this is a current project that I'm working on, kind of recreating the Superman scene. But this idea of going through iterations, because as an effects artist, that's something that you have to do like daily, is you wedge your values in order to like kind of polish the effect until you get something that's more along the lines of what you were thinking or what you were going for. And even though some of these are playblast, the final ones, this entire like 115 frame sequence I can render in less than like 5 minutes. And to be able to get that it's invaluable as an artist, because you can go through and start tweaking. You can start playing and offering more of a creative feedback loop. So if you're new to rendering in general, or if you're interested in becoming an animator or effects artist, I would highly recommend you start with Redshift, because the interface is becoming more and more user-friendly. One of the obstacles that you'll run into as a student is that some of the sampling and some of the interface of the actual rendering, like dialog boxes, they can get really convoluted. And unless you're like taught, as we are on campus at GNOMON, by our teachers, like what each slider does individually, it can get very just confusing and almost intimidating. And I think Redshift is particularly trying to make it more user-friendly and almost dumbing down certain parts of the software to make it more available. So it affects like this idea of like, what I was talking about earlier, less penalty for rookie mistakes, because you're going to make mistakes as an artist, and particularly as a student, you're going to continue making these mistakes that are almost obvious to other more professionals. But having less of a penalty and having not to wait multiple hours to get the new product or like what you change. Like for instance, if you forget to turn on like an AOV layer or like a render element and you want to have that in compositing, rather than like waiting 4 or 5 hours for the entire sequence to re-render, you get that that kind of that room to make those mistakes, and it's just less of a penalty in general. And this is going to affect your creativity, which I think is almost more important than everything else. Is the fact that as an artist, having these multiple iterations means that you get to like explore the software and like the project. And this is what I was showing you earlier about the multiple wedges in that Shockwave project. So let's go a little bit more into how NVIDIA has helped Redshift and how I'm seeing like more of like a synergistic relationship between the two companies. So on the left, you can see the Redshift 2.0, which is a couple of years old now, but I think 2.6 is like the most recently available version of Redshift. And they're going to come out with 3.0 very, very soon, if not this year during SIGGRAPH. But they are making like large steps in towards the core programming of the software. So even like beyond just like base time renders of like 3 minutes versus 16 seconds, you can see that the sampling rate is also a lot lower for arguably better, like not even arguably, for better results. And that's part of their attempt to start streamlining their interface for people that are not necessarily comfortable with having everything separated and having all the elements like laid out for you in terms of sampling that V-Ray almost expects the user to have. And I think I'm assuming that has to go in the aspect that because Redshift is designed by people who used to work in video games, and that was their inspiration for making Redshift was to make a GPU-based renderer, because that was already something that they were using in games. They don't find the aspect of setting sampling and then finding out that you're going to get an error conducive to a healthy like artistic and work environment. So 2.6 is like the most recent version of Redshift that's out right now. I'm gonna go through some of like how their larger steps and like how they've improved the work over these past several years. So they've introduced ray tracing, which has been a big like big word these past couple months even. You can like walk around and everything, almost like all the booths are talking about ray tracing and how they integrated it into their systems. But Redshift, previously the biggest complaint against it was that it didn't have almost what was standard for like other renderers such as Arnold and V-Ray. And that's like this idea of like subsurface scattering, this idea of getting light to penetrate beyond surface level and actually affect different aspects of the model interiorly. They introduced denoising, which is now integrated with optics, which is like a AI that helps basically this denoising process. But what's really nice is that there is this relationship between Redshift and this relation and NVIDIA, and how they're almost like bouncing ideas off of each other. And as soon as NVIDIA comes out with a new product that has a new feature like optics or ray tracing, or Redshift almost immediately jumps on that bandwagon and kind of integrates it into their own software. This is something that probably should have occurred during the first iteration of Redshift, but they just back in 2.5, they integrated the idea of channeling your lights and creating a barred door effect, which was like from day one at V-Ray. And then an idea of like being able to apply a cryptomat layer, which is just a subsampling version of your RGB passes. And then what's really nice is that they also have started to make these movements into like I was saying, the interface and having easier user compatibility. So this is their render view. They're starting to have like the LUT, so you can start applying things that you already see in post, but see it within Maya, within the Redshift render view. So you can see that they have your LUTs to apply color grading. They have exposure. They have bloom in order to get like this glowing effect on the lights. They have flares in case you want some type of bokeh on your And they also they have subsampling motion blur. So now instead of, rather than with V-Ray still doesn't have this, where one frame to the next, you can get motion blur, but it's only in a straight line. But through subsampling motion deformation, with Redshift, you can actually get these arcs, which is super handy with animation. And it always has frustrated me that you don't really get that out of the box with V-Ray. So what to expect in 3.0? We talked a little bit about like where Redshift stands right now, but I think this relationship between the two companies, between NVIDIA and between Redshift, is only going to continue within the next couple of years, and you're probably going to learn even more about that during the next couple of days here at SIGGRAPH. So new ray management, this idea of getting caustics, which is the bending of the light in between refracted materials, such in this case diamonds. An issue that Redshift has had in the past is that they don't actually offer caustics because most of their lighting was done through direct lighting, and you really get the best caustic render pass if you do it with indirect lighting. But the problem with indirect lighting is that it's very probability driven, so you get a lot of noise. And within these past couple of years, Redshift has kind of like merged both of them, indirect and direct lighting, to create like a better effect overall that doesn't really take it doesn't hinder render time at all. So new ray management, integration of optics, which I kind of like mentioned a little bit earlier, which is like that AI denoising of NVIDIA. Automatic sampling, this is the idea to like almost dumb down the interface. So you only will have one slider from like low quality to high quality render, and then Redshift will actually handle all of the calculations under the hood. Dual support of both RTX and non-RTX GPUs. And this is something that I actually find really promising about Redshift, is not only that they're taking all of these, all of the feedback that they're getting from their users and starting integrating it, like the barn door effect or like caustics and issues that users who do these, who work with it every day are having, but they're also making it more available for like single license users or for students who can't necessarily purchase like a production grade GPU, is that they still have this integration of both versions. And then this is some examples from the Redshift GTC presentation this past year, where they're showing some of how Redshift can affect larger projects. Like in terms of this, I think this, like he was quoted in saying like 40 billion grass geo or instances. So it's like a lot of polygons that you have to render, and all it says like subsurface, and you're still getting, you know, 1 minute and 46 seconds, like less than 2 minutes to get this like very high quality render. Just another example. NVLink support, shader SDK in case you want to like make your own shaders. They're starting to integrate that within this next year. And tune shading for studios that are more interested in like integrating 3D and 2D animation. So all in all, yeah, that's the presentation. I think we're going to do a raffle here in a minute for people who have stuck around. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me at the end of the presentation, or just in general, you can email me. My email is harrison.josh@gmail.com, or you can message me on Instagram or station. But yeah, thanks for tuning in. I appreciate it.